The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned streets of Cedar Falls, a once thriving suburban town that now resembled a ghost town from a forgotten era. Dr. Sarah Chin pressed her face against the reinforced glass of the community center's second-floor window, watching the scattered figures shambling aimlessly through the parking lot below. 3 weeks had passed since the outbreak began, and the transformed individuals moved with an unsettling persistence, their movements jerky and unnatural. The scientist in her still struggled to accept what she was witnessing, even as the evidence shuffled past her observation point day after day. Behind her, the sound of hushed conversations filled the makeshift command center that the survivors had established in what used to be the town's recreation facility. Maps covered every available surface, marked with red X's indicating contaminated zones and green circles showing potential safe houses. Marcus Rivera, a former military sergeant, stood at the center of it all, his weathered face etched with the weight of leadership he never asked for. His tactical experience had become invaluable in organizing the 43 survivors who had managed to reach the community center during the initial chaos. "The supply run to the grocery store yielded less than we hoped," reported Jenny Walsh, a local teacher who had proven surprisingly adept at inventory management. "We're looking at maybe 10 days of food if we maintain current rationing." Her voice carried the exhaustion that had become common among the group, but also the determination that kept them functioning as a unit. The transformation had begun without warning on a Tuesday morning when the first reports came through emergency broadcasts. What started as isolated incidents of aggressive behavior quickly escalated into something far more sinister. The affected individuals displayed a relentless drive to pursue others, their behavior becoming increasingly erratic and dangerous. Traditional forms of communication seemed impossible with them, and they showed no recognition of former friends or family members. Dr. Chin turned from the window, her medical expertise making her the group's unofficial authority on understanding their transformed neighbors. "I've been observing their patterns," she announced to the assembled survivors. "They're drawn to sound and movement, but they seem to have limited problem-solving abilities. They can't operate door handles or navigate complex obstacles." This information had already saved lives, allowing the survivors to create barriers and escape routes that their pursuers couldn't overcome. The community center had been fortified over the past weeks, with furniture barricaded against entrances and windows reinforced with whatever materials they could find. The building's layout provided multiple levels and exit routes, making it defensible while offering options for evacuation if needed. Solar panels on the roof still provided limited electricity, and the facility's water systems remained functional, giving the survivors crucial advantages in their fight for survival. Young Tommy Martinez, barely 16 but already showing the maturity that crisis brings, burst through the stairwell door with urgent news. "There's a large group moving in from the east side of town," he reported breathlessly. "Maybe 30 or 40 of them, all heading this direction." The teenager had volunteered for scouting duties, his small size and quick reflexes making him ideal for gathering intelligence about movement patterns in the surrounding area. Marcus immediately shifted into tactical mode, his military training taking over as he assessed the threat. "Everyone to positions. Sarah, get the medical supplies ready for transport. Jenny, ensure the emergency packs are distributed." The group had rehearsed this scenario multiple times, understanding that their current location might not remain safe indefinitely. The approaching horde represented the largest concentration of transformed individuals they had encountered since establishing their temporary base. Previous encounters had involved smaller groups that could be avoided or diverted, but this mass movement suggested something had triggered a coordinated response. Dr. Chin theorized that some form of group behavior was emerging among the transformed, making them potentially more dangerous than individual encounters. As the survivors prepared their defensive positions, the weight of their situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. They had managed to create a temporary sanctuary, but the world beyond their walls remained hostile and unpredictable. The approaching group would test their preparations and resolve, forcing them to confront the reality that their current refuge might only be the first stop in a much longer journey. The sound of dragging footsteps grew closer, echoing off the empty buildings that surrounded their position. Through the reinforced windows, they could see the mass of figures emerging from the morning mist, their movements synchronized in a way that sent chills down the spines of even the most hardened survivors. The ultimate survival challenge was about to begin, and every decision they made in the coming hours would determine whether humanity could truly hold its ground against this unprecedented threat. The tension in the community center reached a breaking point as the approaching horde drew closer, their collective footsteps creating an ominous rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the survivors' racing heartbeats. Marcus positioned himself at the main observation point, his experienced eyes scanning the mass of transformed individuals as they moved with unsettling coordination toward their refuge. Through his binoculars, he could see details that made his stomach tighten. These weren't the random wanderers they had encountered before, but a focused group that seemed to share a common purpose. Dr. Chin had established herself at a secondary observation post, her scientific mind working overtime to process the behavioral patterns she was witnessing. "Marcus," she called out in a controlled whisper, "they're not just moving toward us randomly. Watch how they navigate around obstacles. There's a level of problem-solving I haven't seen before." Her observation sent ripples of concern through the nearby survivors, who had relied on the transformed individuals' limited cognitive abilities as a key advantage in their survival strategy. The defensive preparations kicked into high gear as Jenny coordinated the distribution of emergency supplies while maintaining an accurate count of their resources. Each survivor had been assigned specific roles based on their skills and abilities, creating a system that maximized their collective strengths. Tommy and two other young survivors took positions at strategic windows, serving as communication links between different areas of the building. Their youth made them naturally quick and adaptable, perfect for relaying information during the chaos that was about to unfold. The first wave of the horde reached the outer perimeter of the community center's grounds, and the survivors watched in fascination and horror as the transformed individuals began to test the barriers they had constructed. Rather than mindlessly throwing themselves against the obstacles, they seemed to probe for weaknesses, moving along the fencing with a methodical approach that suggested retained problem-solving abilities. This behavior contradicted everything the survivors had learned about their transformed neighbors over the past 3 weeks. Marcus made quick tactical decisions as the situation evolved before his eyes. "They're learning," he announced to his team. "Change of plans, we implement Protocol 7. This was their most conservative defensive strategy, designed for scenarios where the transformed individuals displayed unexpected capabilities. The survivors moved with practiced efficiency, having rehearsed this contingency multiple times during their preparation sessions. The community center's reinforced windows provided clear views of the horde's approach, allowing Dr. Chen to continue her observations while the group prepared for potential contact. She noticed that the transformed individuals seemed to communicate through subtle body language and positioning, coordinating their movements in ways that suggested a primitive form of group intelligence. This discovery would prove crucial for their long-term survival, but in the immediate moment, it meant their current defensive strategy might be insufficient. The sound of testing barriers echoed through the building as the horde began their systematic examination of the survivors' defenses. Rather than random attacks, the transformed individuals worked together to identify weak points, with some serving as distractions while others explored alternative entry routes. The survivors realized they were facing an adversary that had evolved beyond their initial understanding, requiring immediate adaptations to their defensive plans. Jenny's inventory management skills proved invaluable as she coordinated the rapid redistribution of supplies based on the changing tactical situation. The group had always planned for potential evacuation, but the current threat level suggested they might need to implement those plans sooner than expected. Emergency packs were verified and positioned for quick access, while important documents and medical supplies were secured for transport. The psychological pressure on the survivors intensified as they realized their transformed neighbors retained more cognitive abilities than previously believed. The implications extended far beyond their immediate defensive needs, raising questions about the nature of the transformation and the possibility of communication or even reversal. Dr. Chin found herself torn between her scientific curiosity and the immediate need to ensure the group's survival. As the horde completed their initial assessment of the community center's defenses, a tense silence fell over both groups. The transformed individuals positioned themselves in what appeared to be a coordinated formation, while the survivors maintained their defensive positions, waiting for the next phase of the encounter. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the standoff, highlighting the dramatic transformation that had occurred in their once peaceful community. The first real test of human resilience against their transformed neighbors was about to begin, and both sides seemed to understand that the outcome would determine not just immediate survival, but the future dynamics of their coexistence. The survivors had learned that their enemy was more capable than expected, but they had also discovered that human adaptability and cooperation could evolve to meet new challenges, setting the stage for a confrontation that would define their struggle for survival. The standoff shattered when the first transformed individual discovered a weakness in the community center's eastern wall, where repeated weather exposure had compromised the building's structural integrity. The creature's methodical probing revealed a loose section of reinforced boarding that had been overlooked during the survivors' fortification efforts. Within moments, the discovery triggered a coordinated response from the entire horde, as they converged on the vulnerable point with disturbing efficiency. Marcus's voice cut through the rising panic as he redirected the survivors toward their evacuation protocols. "This is not a drill. Implement Emergency Plan Delta. Jenny, initiate the supply chain transfer. Tommy, signal the rooftop team." His military training took over as he transformed from defensive coordinator to evacuation leader, understanding that their carefully constructed refuge was about to become a trap rather than a sanctuary. Dr. Chin grabbed her emergency research materials while continuing to observe the horde's breakthrough tactics. The transformed individuals worked with a level of cooperation that defied their previous understanding of the condition. Some created distractions at other points around the building while others focused their efforts on widening the breach. "They're using tactical coordination," she called out to Marcus as she secured her most important notes. "This isn't random behavior, they're implementing a strategy." The eastern wall gave way with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire building, sending debris cascading into the community center's main hall. The survivors had precious minutes before the horde would fully exploit their entry point. Jenny's organizational skills proved crucial as she ensured that each survivor grabbed their assigned emergency pack while maintaining an accurate count of the group. The weeks of preparation and drill practice showed their value as the evacuation proceeded with remarkable efficiency despite the chaos. The building's layout provided multiple escape routes, but the horde's coordinated approach threatened to cut off several of these options. Marcus made split-second decisions about which routes remained viable, directing different groups of survivors toward various exits based on real-time assessment of the threat. The community center's multiple levels became both an advantage and a complication as they navigated their escape while the transformed individuals poured through the breach. Tommy's agility and quick thinking proved invaluable as he scouted ahead of the main group, using his knowledge of the building's layout to identify safe passages and potential obstacles. His reports back to Marcus allowed the group to avoid several close encounters with transformed individuals who had entered through secondary breaches. The teenagers' courage under pressure demonstrated how the crisis had forced rapid maturation among the younger survivors. The escape through the building's rear exit brought them into the transformed landscape of Cedar Falls, where abandoned vehicles and debris created both obstacles and opportunities for concealment. The group moved in practiced formation, with Marcus taking point while Dr. Chin and Jenny maintained order among the survivors. The afternoon sun created harsh shadows that provided cover but also concealed potential threats lurking in the urban wasteland. As they navigated through the town's back streets, the reality of their situation became clear. They were no longer observers of the transformation but active participants in a deadly game of survival. The familiar neighborhoods had become alien territory, with overturned cars and broken windows telling stories of the chaos that had unfolded during the initial outbreak. Every intersection required careful scouting. Every building could hide either refuge or danger. The group's cohesion faced its first major test when they encountered a secondary group of transformed individuals blocking their planned route to the designated backup location. The survivors found themselves caught between the pursuing horde from the community center and this new threat, forcing them to make desperate decisions about their direction and strategy. The mathematical precision of their evacuation plan gave way to improvisation and survival instinct. In the confusion of rerouting through unfamiliar territory, the group became separated when a collapsed overpass forced them to split into smaller units. Marcus found himself leading one group toward the industrial district while Dr. Chin guided another toward the residential area. Jenny's group took shelter in an abandoned school building, each faction now facing the challenge of survival without their full complement of skills and resources. The separation created multiple survival scenarios that would test each group's ability to apply the lessons they had learned during their time at the community center. The transformed individuals' improved capabilities meant that smaller groups faced proportionally greater challenges, but it also provided opportunities for stealth and mobility that had been impossible with the larger group. As evening approached and the separated survivors established temporary shelters, the full scope of their new reality became apparent. The community center had represented safety and preparation, but the streets of Cedar Falls demanded constant adaptation and split-second decision-making. The transformed individuals had evolved beyond their initial understanding, but the human capacity for resilience and cooperation would be tested in ways that would define their chances for long-term survival in this new world. Marcus's group of 12 survivors had spent the night huddled in the basement of an abandoned hardware store, using the building's concrete foundation as protection from the transformed individuals that continued to patrol the streets above. The industrial district had provided temporary refuge, but the constant sounds of footsteps and scratching suggested that their location wouldn't remain secret for long. As dawn approached, the group faced the critical decision of whether to remain hidden or venture into the unknown territory that lay beyond their current shelter. The discovery came when Tommy, despite explicit instructions to stay put, had been exploring the basement storage areas and found a section of flooring that sounded hollow when tapped. His curiosity led him to uncover a maintenance hatch that opened into what appeared to be part of Cedar Falls' forgotten subway system, a transit project that had been abandoned decades earlier when funding ran out. The tunnel system stretched into darkness, offering possibilities that ranged from salvation to catastrophe. Marcus examined the entrance with a mixture of professional interest and deep concern. His military experience had taught him that underground systems could provide excellent protection from surface threats, but they also presented unique dangers including structural collapse, limited exit options, and the possibility of becoming trapped with no means of escape. The decision to explore required weighing immediate threats against unknown risks, a calculation that had become routine in their transformed world. Dr. Chen's scientific background proved invaluable as she assessed the tunnel's construction and structural integrity. The concrete appeared sound despite decades of neglect, and the ventilation systems, though not operational, showed no signs of dangerous gas accumulation. Her medical training also helped her recognize that the underground environment would provide protection from the elements and potential concealment from the transformed individuals who seemed to rely heavily on surface-level hunting patterns. The group's descent into the tunnel system revealed a surprisingly extensive network that connected multiple areas of the town. Emergency lighting systems had long since failed, but the survivors' flashlights illuminated passages that stretched far beyond their current location. The tunnels represented both an opportunity for safe travel and a potential maze that could disorient them if they weren't careful about navigation and marking their route. As they explored deeper into the system, they encountered evidence that others had discovered these tunnels before them. Supply caches, makeshift sleeping areas, and crude directional markers suggested that previous survivors had used these passages for shelter and transportation. The discovery raised hopes that they might encounter other groups of survivors, but it also meant that the tunnels weren't the secret refuge they had initially appeared to be. The first contact with other survivors came when they heard voices echoing from a side passage, speaking in hushed tones that suggested both caution and organization. Marcus decided to approach carefully, using established protocols for identifying potentially friendly groups while maintaining defensive positions in case the encounter proved hostile. The survivors they met were a family of 5 who had been living in the tunnels for over a week, having fled from a different part of town when their neighborhood became overrun. The family's leader, an engineer named Robert Kim, provided crucial information about the tunnel system's layout and the locations of other survivor groups who had established temporary communities underground. His technical knowledge complemented Dr. Chen's scientific background, creating a partnership that would prove essential for understanding both the infrastructure they now depended on and the behavioral patterns of the transformed individuals above ground. The combined groups established a temporary base in a wider section of the tunnel that had originally been designed as a station platform. The space provided room for their expanded numbers while offering multiple routes for escape if the location became compromised. Robert's family had already begun implementing basic sanitation and organization systems, demonstrating that longer-term survival in the underground environment was possible with proper planning and cooperation. The underground community faced unique challenges that surface survival hadn't prepared them for, including water management, waste disposal, and the psychological effects of extended periods without natural light. However, the tunnel system also offered advantages such as stable temperatures, protection from weather, and the ability to move between locations without exposure to the surface threats that had forced them underground. As the groups worked together to establish their underground refuge, they began to understand that they had discovered more than just a hiding place. They had found a potential foundation for rebuilding their community in a way that could coexist with the transformed world above. The tunnel system represented both shelter and opportunity, a chance to create something new while maintaining the human connections that had kept them alive through the initial crisis. The success of their underground establishment would depend on their ability to adapt their survival strategies to this new environment while maintaining the cooperation and resilience that had brought them this far. The transformed individuals might control the surface, but humanity's capacity for innovation and adaptation was beginning to carve out spaces where hope could flourish even in the most challenging circumstances. The underground community had grown to 23 survivors over the past few days, but the absence of Dr. Chen's group and Jenny's team weighed heavily on everyone's minds. Marcus stood before a hand-drawn map of Cedar Falls that Robert Kim had sketched on the tunnel wall, marking known survivor locations with different colored chalk. The engineer's technical expertise had proven invaluable in understanding the tunnel system's layout, but the map also revealed the daunting scope of their search area and the risks involved in venturing back to the surface. The first rescue mission launched at dawn, with Marcus leading a carefully selected team of 4 survivors toward the residential district where Dr. Chen's group had been headed during their separation. The team moved through the tunnel system with practiced efficiency, using Robert's knowledge of the infrastructure to navigate the underground passages while avoiding areas where structural damage might compromise their safety. Their route would bring them within 3 blocks of the abandoned school where intelligence suggested Jenny's group might have taken shelter. Above ground, the transformed individuals had settled into predictable patrol patterns that the survivors had begun to map and understand. Dr. Chen's earlier observations about their behavior proved crucial as the rescue team timed their surface movements to coincide with periods of reduced activity. The creatures seemed to follow circadian rhythms that made them less active during certain hours, providing narrow windows of opportunity for careful surface operations. The search for Dr. Chen's group led them through neighborhoods that had become unrecognizable mazes of debris and abandoned vehicles. The team communicated through hand signals and predetermined codes, moving with the stealth and coordination that had become second nature during their weeks of survival. Each building they checked revealed stories of the chaos that had unfolded during the initial outbreak, but also provided clues about the movements of other survivor groups. The first breakthrough came when they discovered messages scratched into the wall of a corner store, coded communications that Dr. Chen's group had left to indicate their direction and status. The scientific precision of the markings reflected her methodical approach to survival, providing hope that her group was maintaining their organization and decision-making capabilities despite the challenging circumstances. The messages also revealed that they had encountered other survivors and were attempting to establish communication networks. Following the trail of coded messages led the rescue team to a surprising discovery. A network of survivor groups had been communicating through a system of marked routes and message drops that extended throughout the residential district. The coordination suggested that the human response to the crisis was becoming more sophisticated and organized, with different groups sharing information about resources, threats, and safe passages through the transformed landscape. The reunion with Dr. Chen's group occurred in the basement of a medical clinic where they had established a temporary aid station for injured survivors from multiple groups. Her medical expertise had made her a valuable resource for the broader survivor community, and she had been working to treat injuries and illnesses that had accumulated during the weeks of crisis. The joy of reunification was tempered by the sobering realization that the medical needs of the survivor population were growing faster than their ability to address them. Jenny's group proved more elusive, but intelligence gathered from the various survivor networks indicated that they had successfully established themselves in the abandoned school and were coordinating with at least 2 other groups in the eastern part of town. The school's layout and resources had made it an ideal location for a larger survivor community, but it also meant that a rescue operation would be more complex and potentially more dangerous. The expanded intelligence network revealed that Cedar Falls now contained multiple survivor communities, each with different strengths and capabilities. Some groups focused on resource gathering and distribution, others specialized in reconnaissance and communication, while still others had developed expertise in defensive strategies and security. The diversity of approaches suggested that human adaptation to the crisis was producing innovative solutions that no single group could have developed alone. As the rescue teams prepared for the more challenging mission to reach Jenny's group, they realized that their objective had evolved beyond simple reunification. The survivor communities were becoming interconnected through necessity and mutual aid, creating a larger network that represented hope for long-term survival and eventual recovery. The search missions had revealed that humanity's response to the crisis was becoming more sophisticated and coordinated. The underground base now served as a central hub for coordinating communication between the various survivor groups, with Robert's technical knowledge enabling them to establish primitive but effective communication systems. The tunnel network provided secure channels for movement and coordination, while the surface groups maintained visibility and resource access. The combination created a survival network that was greater than the sum of its parts. The success of the search operations demonstrated that human cooperation and ingenuity could overcome even the most challenging circumstances, setting the stage for more ambitious coordinated efforts that would transform scattered survivor groups into a unified community capable of mounting an effective response to their transformed world. The abandoned Cedar Falls High School gymnasium had been transformed into an unlikely meeting hall where representatives from 7 different survivor communities gathered for the first coordinated planning session since the outbreak began. Jenny's organizational skills had proven invaluable in arranging this historic gathering, with her group serving as hosts while Marcus and Dr. Chen represented the tunnel network that had become the backbone of intercommunity communication. The diversity of survival strategies and resources represented in the room demonstrated humanity's remarkable capacity for adaptation under extreme circumstances. Each community had developed unique specializations based on their circumstances and available resources. The hospital group, led by Dr. Patricia Reeves, had maintained advanced medical capabilities and pharmaceutical supplies, making them crucial for treating injuries and illnesses throughout the survivor network. The industrial district community had focused on manufacturing and repair capabilities, creating tools and defensive equipment that other groups desperately needed. The agricultural group had established greenhouse operations and food production systems that provided hope for long-term sustainability. Robert Kim's technical expertise had enabled the establishment of a primitive but effective communication network that connected the various communities through a combination of radio equipment, signal mirrors, and coded message systems. The network allowed for real-time coordination of resource sharing, threat warnings, and collaborative planning that had dramatically improved survival rates across all participating groups. The system represented a triumph of human ingenuity over technological limitations imposed by the crisis. The first major collaborative initiative emerged when the communities agreed to pool their intelligence about the transformed individuals' behavior patterns and territorial habits. Dr. Chen's scientific observations, combined with field reports from multiple groups, had revealed that the creatures followed predictable schedules and maintained consistent territorial boundaries that could be mapped and exploited. This intelligence formed the foundation for coordinated movement and resource-gathering operations that significantly reduced risk for all participating communities. The unified approach to resource management revolutionized survival prospects for all the communities involved. Jenny's inventory systems were scaled up to track resources across multiple locations, enabling efficient distribution based on need rather than availability. Medical supplies flowed from the hospital group to communities with injured members, while the industrial group provided defensive equipment and tools in exchange for food and raw materials from other communities. The cooperation created abundance where scarcity had previously threatened survival. The establishment of secure communication and supply routes between communities required careful coordination and timing based on the mapped behavior patterns of the transformed individuals. Teams of volunteers from multiple communities worked together to clear and maintain these routes, creating a network of safe passages that connected the scattered survivor groups into a cohesive whole. The collaborative effort demonstrated that coordination could overcome challenges that individual communities couldn't address alone. Training programs emerged as communities shared their specialized knowledge and skills with members from other groups. Medical training sessions taught basic first aid and emergency procedures to non-medical personnel, while tactical training shared defensive strategies and coordination techniques across the network. The cross-pollination of skills and knowledge strengthened each community while creating backup capabilities that improved overall resilience. The psychological impact of unification proved as important as the practical benefits, as survivors gained hope from knowing they were part of a larger community working toward common goals. The isolation and desperation that had characterized the early weeks of the crisis gave way to purposeful activity and shared determination. Children from different communities began to interact through carefully supervised meetings, maintaining social development and creating bonds that would define the future of their rebuilt society. The coordinated response revealed that the transformed individuals' apparent tactical improvements had been overestimated, as their behavior remained largely predictable when observed systematically across multiple locations. The creature's coordination was more instinctive than strategic, following patterns that could be understood and countered through careful observation and planning. This discovery shifted the psychological balance from defensive survival to potential offensive action. As the unified communities established their cooperative framework, they began planning more ambitious projects that would have been impossible for individual groups to attempt. The coordination of resources and expertise created opportunities for infrastructure repair, expanded food production, and improved security that pointed toward long-term recovery rather than mere survival. The transformation from scattered survivors to organized communities represented a crucial turning point in humanity's response to the crisis. The success of the unification effort demonstrated that human cooperation could create solutions that transcended individual limitations, setting the stage for coordinated actions that would test whether the survivor network could transition from defensive survival to active reclamation of their transformed world. The communities had learned that their strength lay not in their individual capabilities but in their collective determination to rebuild and thrive despite the unprecedented challenges they faced. The gymnasium meeting concluded with the establishment of a formal alliance between the survivor communities, complete with communication protocols, resource-sharing agreements and coordinated response plans that would guide their efforts to reclaim Cedar Falls and restore hope for the future. The coordinated operation launched at precisely 6:47 a.m., when the transformed individuals entered their documented period of reduced activity that Dr. Chen's research had identified as the optimal window for large-scale movement. 7 teams of survivors moved simultaneously across Cedar Falls, each targeting strategically selected locations that would create a secure perimeter around the most vital community resources. The months of observation, planning, and preparation culminated in humanity's first organized attempt to reclaim territory from the transformed landscape that had dominated their world. Marcus led the primary assault team toward the Cedar Falls Medical Center, a facility that contained irreplaceable medical equipment and pharmaceutical supplies that could serve the entire survivor network. His team moved with military precision through the tunnel system before emerging 3 blocks from their target, using the underground passages to avoid the patrol routes that the transformed individuals followed with clockwork regularity. The medical center represented both opportunity and risk, as its value made it worth defending while its size created multiple potential complications. Jenny coordinated the logistics operation from the underground command center, tracking the progress of all 7 teams through the communication network that Robert Kim had expanded to support real-time coordination during active operations. Her organizational systems had been adapted to manage the complex timing and resource allocation required for simultaneous multi-location operations. The success of the counterattack depended on precise coordination and the ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances as they developed. Dr. Chen accompanied the team targeting the research laboratory at Cedar Falls University, where scientific equipment and documentation might provide crucial insights into the nature of the transformation and potential approaches for long-term coexistence or even reversal. Her scientific expertise made her indispensable for evaluating the facility's resources and potential applications. The laboratory represented hope for understanding the crisis at a fundamental level rather than simply surviving its effects. The transformed individuals' predictable behavior patterns proved accurate as the teams moved through the early morning landscape with minimal encounters. The creatures' reduced activity during these hours created opportunities for movement that would have been impossible during peak periods, validating the intelligence-gathering efforts that had made the operation possible. However, the teams remained prepared for the possibility that the transformed individuals might adapt to their tactics, requiring flexibility and backup plans for every phase of the operation. The Industrial District team, led by survivors from the manufacturing community, successfully secured the power plant that could potentially restore electricity to portions of Cedar Falls. The facility's generators had remained operational throughout the crisis, but securing the location would allow for expanded power distribution that could support larger survivor communities and more ambitious recovery projects. The restoration of electrical power represented a crucial step toward rebuilding rather than merely surviving. The agricultural team focused on the Cedar Falls Botanical Garden and adjacent greenhouse facilities, which contained seeds, tools, and infrastructure for expanded food production that could support a much larger survivor population. The greenhouses had maintained their structural integrity throughout the crisis, offering immediate opportunities for increased food security. The facility represented hope for long-term sustainability and the possibility of population growth within the survivor communities. Resistance from the transformed individuals proved lighter than anticipated, as their territorial behavior had not adapted to defend against coordinated attacks on multiple locations simultaneously. The creatures responded to individual incursions but seemed unable to coordinate a defensive response that matched the complexity of the human operation. This discovery reinforced the assessment that their apparent tactical improvements were more instinctive than strategic, providing confidence for future operations. The most significant breakthrough came when the university team discovered research data that had been compiled during the early stages of the outbreak, providing scientific documentation of the transformation process and its effects on cognitive function. Dr. Chen's analysis of the data revealed that the condition might not be permanent, offering hope for potential treatments or even reversal procedures that could restore affected individuals to their previous state. The discovery transformed the operation from territorial reclamation to potential rescue mission. By midday, all 7 teams had successfully secured their targets and established defensive perimeters that created the first human-controlled territory since the initial outbreak. The coordinated operation demonstrated that organized human response could overcome the challenges posed by the transformed individuals, shifting the balance from defensive survival to active reclamation. The success provided both practical benefits and psychological validation of the survivor community's capacity for effective action. The establishment of secure zones allowed for the implementation of more ambitious recovery projects, including infrastructure repair, expanded communication networks, and systematic exploration of areas that had been inaccessible during the crisis. The counterattack had created foundations for rebuilding that extended far beyond the immediate tactical objectives, opening possibilities for long-term recovery and growth. The success of the coordinated operation marked a turning point in the relationship between the survivor communities and their transformed environment, demonstrating that human cooperation, intelligence, and determination could create positive change even in the most challenging circumstances, setting the stage for the comprehensive rebuilding efforts that would define their path forward. 6 months after the successful counterattack, Cedar Falls bore little resemblance to the chaotic wasteland that had emerged during the initial outbreak. The secure perimeter established by the coordinated operation had expanded systematically as the survivor communities implemented their long-term recovery plan with the same methodical approach that had ensured their survival during the crisis. The transformation from desperate survival to purposeful rebuilding demonstrated humanity's remarkable capacity to not only endure catastrophic change but to emerge stronger and more unified than before. Dr. Chin stood in the restored university laboratory, reviewing the progress reports from the treatment trials that had begun 3 months earlier. The research data recovered during the counterattack had provided the foundation for developing interventions that could reverse the transformation in its early stages, offering hope for individuals who had been affected recently. While the process remained experimental and couldn't help those who had been transformed since the beginning, it represented a crucial breakthrough that could prevent future casualties and gradually reduce the affected population through natural causes. The power plant restoration had exceeded all expectations, with the industrial district team successfully bringing online enough generating capacity to provide electricity to the core survivor areas. Street lights illuminated the main thoroughfares for the first time since the outbreak, while restored communication systems enabled coordination across an expanding network of communities that now extended beyond Cedar Falls to neighboring towns. The electrical grid had become a symbol of returning civilization and technological capability. Marcus reviewed the security reports from his office in the converted community center, noting the dramatic reduction in encounters with transformed individuals over the past month. The establishment of secure zones had created islands of safety that allowed normal activities to resume, while the treatment program had prevented new transformations from occurring within the protected areas. The creatures that remained seemed to avoid the secured zones, suggesting that territorial boundaries were becoming more clearly defined and stable. Jenny's administrative systems had evolved to manage a population of over 300 survivors who now lived and worked within the secure perimeter. The resource management challenges had shifted from scarcity and survival to allocation and growth planning, requiring entirely different organizational approaches. Schools had reopened for the children, while adult education programs helped survivors develop new skills needed for rebuilding and expansion. The transformation from crisis management to community development represented a fundamental change in their approach to daily life. The agricultural initiatives had produced their first major harvest, with the greenhouse facilities and restored farmland providing food security that eliminated the constant worry about supplies that had dominated the early months of the crisis. Trade relationships with other survivor communities had established supply networks that brought variety and abundance that seemed impossible during the darkest periods of the outbreak. The success of food production had enabled population growth and attracted new survivors who sought the stability and security of the Cedar Falls community. Robert Kim's engineering projects had restored water treatment facilities and waste management systems that supported the growing population while maintaining public health standards that prevented disease outbreaks. The infrastructure improvements had created foundations for continued expansion and attracted skilled survivors from other areas who contributed expertise in specialized fields. The technical capabilities of the community had reached levels that supported not just survival but comfort and quality of life improvements. The psychological transformation of the survivor communities proved as significant as their physical accomplishments, as the fear and uncertainty that had defined the crisis period gave way to confidence and optimism about the future. Children who had experienced the outbreak were growing up in a world where human cooperation and ingenuity had triumphed over unprecedented challenges, creating a generation that understood both the fragility and resilience of civilization. Their education included both traditional subjects and practical skills that would serve them well in their rebuilt world. The research programs continued to seek understanding of the transformation phenomenon and methods for preventing future outbreaks, while also exploring ways to help communities in other regions that were still struggling with the crisis. Cedar Falls had become a model for recovery and rebuilding that offered hope and practical guidance for survivors worldwide. The community's success demonstrated that human civilization could adapt and overcome even catastrophic disruptions when people worked together with shared purpose and determination. As evening approached and the restored street lights began to illuminate the bustling community center where families gathered for dinner and children played games that had been impossible during the crisis, the survivors reflected on their journey from desperate fugitives to confident rebuilders. The transformed individuals still existed beyond their secure perimeter, but they no longer represented an existential threat to human survival and recovery. The new dawn that had emerged from the darkness of the outbreak proved that humanity's greatest strength lay not in individual survival but in collective action, demonstrating that cooperation, intelligence, and determination could create thriving communities even in the aftermath of civilization's greatest challenges. Cedar Falls stood as proof that humans could indeed hold their ground in any survival challenge, emerging not just intact but stronger than before.